Hello, good evening to all of you, and welcome to Byju's exam prep. I shall be needing a confirmation regarding the audio, please. If you are able to hear me out perfectly fine, kindly confirm the same. Thank you. We shall be starting in a couple of minutes. Okay, so hello, good evening once again, and welcome to this live discussion where we shall be holding the discussion for the prelims test series for the subject of geography and environment, which was conducted on this Sunday. And I hope that you have appeared for this test regardless of the marks that you score. Basically, right now you have to focus on appearing on this test, and you have to focus on learning from the mistakes and the errors that you end up committing. So in this particular session, we shall be holding up the discussion of few of the important questions. We shall not be holding discussions for the factual questions per se, but few of the important ones we are going to discuss, and we are going to have an endeavor, we are going to have an effort so that we are able to cover areas and questions from different particular areas, and we are able to address that. More or less, we are going to look into the approach that we need to have, and what is it that we should look forward when you are appearing for the further tests. And again, I will tell you, regardless of whatever you are scoring, if you are scoring less or more, as of now, even if you are scoring more, you should not take too much from it. Even if you are ending up scoring less marks, you should never get worried by it. But yes, you should not absolutely put it on the carpet. You should analyze carefully amongst the explanations, amongst the various questions, where is it that you went wrong. Please understand that in these MCQs, when you go wrong, when you commit an error, there can only be 2 to 3 possible reasons why you are committing a mistake. Either there is a lack of content and you didn't know what the question was about. Second, there is a lack of concentration. You wanted to, or you knew the answer, but then due to lack of concentration, you ended up marking something else. And third, there is a lack of clarity, where you end up getting confused upon the wordings of the answer. So, after you have appeared for the test, I want you to take an A4 sheet paper and write down how many questions you marked it incorrect because of lack of content or lack of knowledge. Thereby, upon looking at the explanation, you can virtually add that particular information to your knowledge arsenal. You can always improvise upon the existing knowledge set that you have. And if you have a lot of questions which you knew but you still ended up doing it incorrectly, that is where the quickest improvement will come. So you have to focus on minimizing your silly mistakes as of now and look at where to augment your content. Only then will you be able to extract the maximum benefit out of these prelims test series, which shall be spanning up till the month of May. So from every test, that is how you have to extract most out of it. Okay. So that is something which you always have to focus upon. So without further ado, let us begin the discussion and let us initiate the discussion regarding these questions. So we shall be starting with the first question. The first question is, what is the correct chronological sequence of occurrence of the following stages of evolution of Earth's present atmosphere, starting from earliest to latest? So you would basically have studied that atmosphere in itself that underwent three different phases of evolution. First of all, you had the existence of a primordial atmosphere. Primordial atmosphere. At this point of time, as we have studied, in the case of primordial atmosphere, which were the gases which dominated the primordial atmosphere? Let me see if we are aware about that. Very good. Hydrogen and helium. Hydrogen and helium. These were the light gases which were present in the initial stage when the planet was still evolving around 4.5 billion years back. Then came the phase of degasification of the planet. At that point of time, due to series of volcanic eruption, you had a kind of an outgassing event due to which you had gases such as ammonia, methane, carbon dioxide, water vapor, etc., which were added to the atmosphere. And the latest phase came in close to around 300 to 500 million years back. And that is when, due to the evolution of species, the existing atmosphere got modified and oxygen was added, right? Carbon dioxide was consumed and oxygen was added to the atmosphere. So basically, addition of water vapor in the atmosphere through an endogenic process. So this happened during the phase of volcanic eruption. So this will always be the second phase, right? Contribution of oxygen to the atmosphere by bacteria. This happened after life began on Earth. So this will always be the last stage, the third stage. And then removal of hydrogen and helium by the impact of solar winds. So this will be the first stage. So we have to arrange them based upon starting from earliest to latest. So the earliest would have been the removal of hydrogen and helium. Then would come addition of water vapor during the phase of degasification. So that would be 3, 1 and eventually 2. So the correct answer in this case will be C, that is 3, 1, 2. Okay. Jyoti, I'm very weak in geography. How should I prepare? So as of now, please simplify the things. Look at the basic NCRTs. Even the basic NCRTs that you end up covering will be more than enough. And please augment it with the tablet videos that you guys have. The tablet videos have covered various portions in significant detail. From the very basic, we have started that. So you can take help of that one by one unit after the other. Just try to understand it. The more you understand it, you will get better at it. See, it is not something which you can do in 1 week or 10 days. It will take you close to around a month. But in a month, you will be in a picture perfect scenario, provided you are regular with that. So do that, start that. There is no reason why you cannot conquer this subject. Okay. Kapil, I think it should be available. Kindly contact the mentors. Now, consider the following statements with reference to the difference between terrestrial planets and Jovian planets. Now, when we talk about terrestrial planets, these are the ones which have a kind of a hard surface, right? So when we say terrestrial planets, these have a kind of a hard surface. So for example, Mercury, for example, Venus, Earth, Mars, these are the terrestrial planets. And Jovian planets, the other four planets that are present, that is basically Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. These are basically the Jovian planets, or the gas giants as they are referred to. The Jovian planets, they end up taking a larger period of time to complete one revolution around the sun. And also, mostly they are composed of gases. Okay. So, unlike terrestrial planets, Jovian planets do not have solid surfaces. This is correct. Then, all terrestrial planets contain an atmosphere, which is absent in Jovian planets. This is incorrect, because you have planets such as Mercury. It is a terrestrial planet, but being so close to the sun, almost all the atmosphere is completely destroyed. Whereas you do have Jovian planets which also have some amount of atmospheric gases present. So the second statement is incorrect. Jovian planets are bigger and denser than terrestrial planets. This again is going to be incorrect, because when we say Jovian planets, they are bigger, but they are not denser, so to say. Terrestrial planets significantly are denser. Okay. Then, unlike Jovian planets, the global magnetic field exists for all terrestrial planets. This again is going to be incorrect, because not all the planets have the case of magnetic fields in the case of terrestrial planets, and it is not as if none of the Jovian planets will have the magnetic field. Okay, so here if you look at it, basically you will have this as incorrect itself. It will be in this case A, that is only one statement. Okay, right? Now then, consider the following statement. Braided channels are formed in the youthful stage of the river. Now, what do we mean by a braided channel? So, when we refer to a braided channel, here you will find that basically in the channel of the river flow itself, you have significant amount of deposits of sediments which are present. Sediments and silt deposits which happen within the river channel, right? So here in this case, why does that happen? So that ends up taking place when you have the speed is low. When the speed is low, that means what? You will have lesser carrying capacity. Carrying capacity will be less. And when you have a lower carrying capacity, that means deposition will be high. In this case, the amount of deposition which will happen, that will always be very high. So in this case, the deposits, they end up happening within the channel and the course of the channel itself. Okay, so this is where the deposits will happen within the course of the river itself. So these braided channels, they are mostly formed in the old stage or in the late mature stage of the river. So here, in the late mature stage, or the old stage. Okay, that is when the speed will be very less. So this is incorrect. Then, due to less active lateral erosion, the meandering courses are not found in the deltaic plains. We do have the meandering courses. Meandering courses means what? It means when you have a kind of a course of the river somewhat like this. That is a meandering course. So that is something which you will always end up finding in the deltaic plains, again in the late mature to the old stage. That is where you will find it. So here it is given, they are not found. So this again is incorrect. With time, stream channels over steep gradients start facilitating active deposition. So what does this statement refer to? With the passage of time, the channels over steep gradient. Steep gradient means where the slope is significant. They start facilitating active deposition. Why? So, what happens is, with the passage of time, if any river stream is moving through here, the river will end up eroding materials in this particular position. They will end up eroding materials in that position, and they will start depositing materials here. So over a period of time, this height gradient of the river, that is taken out of the window. The one land mass or the portion which was present at a height, its height will be reduced, and on the other hand, there will be deposits, etc. So there will be, with the passage of time, a reduction of gradient, which will bring about a reduction in speed. So here, with passage of time, there will be reduction of gradient, reduction in gradient, right? And that will lead to reduction in speed. And always remember this, that carrying capacity is always proportional to speed. So if the speed is less, the carrying capacity will automatically reduce. And thereby, whenever the carrying capacity reduces, deposition is something which will be observed. So here you will have a kind of an active deposition. So this is going to be correct. So which of the statements given above is or are incorrect? Here the answer will be A, that is 1 and 2 only. These are the two which are going to be incorrect. Okay. Now, stream channel, Sirisha, here refers to a kind of any river flow, any runoff for that matter. Okay. Now, then at which of one of the following geographical locations are we most likely to encounter landforms like cliffs, caves, and stacks? Now, cliffs, caves, and stacks, these are basically landforms created as a result of the action of sea waves, isn't it? These are basically coastal landforms. Coastal landforms. And this will be by action of sea waves. Now here, if you look at the various different options given, two of the options, they don't talk about the coastal landform at all. You have Konkan and the Sundarbans, which are still coastal landform. But when we talk about cliffs are where there will be a kind of a height gradient present in between the coastal area, the continental area, and the water body. So in the case of the Sundarbans, again, that is something which you will not observe, because Sundarbans is a deltaic region. Due to significant amount of deposits, it is almost at the sea level. So cliffs, caves, and stacks, that is never going to be found in a kind of a deltaic terrain. So the third statement, or the third option here, Sundarbans, automatically becomes incorrect. So the correct answer in this will be A, that will be Konkan. Okay. I have changed the question, Prakash. Right. So this is how you have the areas where you will find cliffs, caves. In fact, even across the Malabar coastline to the south of the Konkan, that is also where in India you end up finding cliffs, caves, and stacks in presence. Now, a question from environment. Now, which of the following adaptations is or are undertaken by desert-based animals to fulfill their water requirement? Now, adaptations is again another area from where UPSC ends up asking questions, and will ask questions quite frequently. It has asked question in 2018 prelims regarding the adaptations that the desert plants or the xerophytes they undertake. So such kinds of adaptations UPSC will ask you. You have to be prepared for that. So here, when we talk about desert-based animals, they will undertake or undergo any adaptation in order to conserve water, because water is present in absolute scarce amount. So what do? When you have internal fat oxidation, that in itself basically gives out water. The process of oxidation of fat, that gives out water. Similarly, the process of oxidation of starch as well, that will also give out water. Then concentrating the urine. So the urine is not excreted in liquid state, it is excreted in solid pellets. So that is where you have into solid pellets, right? So this is also done in order to conserve the moisture availability. Underground burrowing, again, this is done in order to escape from the harsh conditions. And basically, when you have a kind of a burrowing ability to go into the region of underground area or the substrate, automatically the amount of heat that the body has to withstand, that amount of heat reduces. So the water retention increases, because when you are exposed to more heat, more water is lost in order to compensate for that. So that is why this also is basically in order to conserve water. So the answer in this case will be D, 1, 2, and 3. Internal fat oxidation, guys, is when you have the fat which is present either as an intake of food, or in many of the animals you have a fatty layer which is present. Generally, it is also observed in the different types of animals living in higher latitude, in cold conditions. So there, the internal metabolism of the organism, that is such whereby the fat is basically, fat is what? A kind of a presence of carbon and hydrogen, etc. So when it undergoes oxidation, that hydrogen combines with oxygen and thereby secretes the amount of water required by the organism. Okay, right? I hope that is clear. Right. Now, after that, the next question. With reference to the energy flow through an ecosystem, consider the following statements. A given organism, energy flow from one trophic level to the other trophic level. That is what is the energy flow. A given organism cannot be included in more than one trophic level simultaneously. So any particular organism cannot be included in different trophic levels. So this in itself contradicts the very basic aspect of a food web. We do know that in the case of a food web, you have an organism which can either act as a primary consumer, and the same organism in certain cases can also act as a secondary consumer. So it can occupy multiple different trophic levels in different food chains combined in one food web. So that is where the first statement will be incorrect. Then, pyramid of energy for aquatic ecosystems, that is inverted. Now, this is again incorrect. Why? That is because pyramid of energy is never inverted. In none of the cases will you ever find pyramid of energy to be inverted, because energy always tends to reduce as you move from one trophic level to the other trophic level. So there will always be a reduction in the amount of energy. So which is the pyramid which is inverted in the aquatic ecosystem? You generally have, what is the pyramid which is inverted? Good, very good, Manisha. Ankur, very good. So you have pyramid of biomass, is inverted. Khushbu, what is trophic level is basically when you have a food chain or a food web. So whether an organism is a primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, that is what is defined as a kind of a trophic level. Second statement, Vimal, basically that tells that pyramid of energy for aquatic organisms is inverted, which is not the case, because pyramid of energy will always be upright, because it tells you, it gives you an idea about the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the other. Okay. So here you have both of them, which is incorrect. So the answer will be D, neither one nor two. Then, with reference to the processes occurring during the rock cycle, consider the following pairs. Now, when we talk about rock cycle, what do we mean by rock cycle? So, you would have studied that rock cycle is that ability of any particular rock type to get converted into other rock type if it has got the necessary prerequisite conditions which are available. So one rock type can get converted into another one. So you can have sedimentary rocks getting converted into metamorphic, metamorphic getting converted into igneous, igneous being able to get converted into sedimentary, metamorphic. So that is what defines a kind of a rock cycle. Now, there, when we talk about dynamic metamorphism, what is dynamic metamorphism? So here you have the presence or the formation of a metamorphic rock under the portion where the rocks in general, they are moving and there is significant pressure which is exerted, and the existent rock type, be it sedimentary or igneous, when they get converted into metamorphic. So mechanical disruption of the original minerals that happens. So example of dynamic metamorphism, Think about it. Where is it that you can basically experience dynamic metamorphism? In which region of the country? If you think about it, very good. In the region of Himalayas. Because in the region of Himalayas, if you recall the formation and the evolution of Himalayas, what have we studied there? That right now, particularly in the older mountains of the Himalayas, that is the Great Himalayas, there you have the sedimentary rocks which have gotten converted into metamorphic. In certain cases, even igneous rocks, for example, in the Pir Panjal area, etc., they have also gotten converted into metamorphic. Why is it so? Because the existing rocks, when they are being pushed, there is a kind of a dynamicity associated with it. That is when, due to the motion, there is significant amount of pressure exerted. That is when they start changing the pattern of the molecules, the atom structure, etc., and they start getting converted into metamorphic rock. So the first statement is correctly matched. Banding. Now, we do know that there is a kind of a classification of metamorphic rocks, that we have foliated and non-foliated metamorphic rocks. So the foliated ones are the ones where you have bands, the minerals appearing in various bands. That depends upon the types of minerals that you have present. So here, banding, that is reflected by aligning of minerals in light and dark shades. So that is basically what we refer to as banding. So if you have any kind of a rock, for example, you will have a banded structure, right? That is something you find. This is also what is referred to as a kind of a foliated metamorphic rock. Metamorphic. Okay, so this is basically again going to be incorrect. Then automatically we know that second is matched with the third one. So the third one cannot be matched correctly at all. So without looking at it, automatically you will know that the third is also incorrect. Having said that, when we talk about lithification, lithification is that process in the formation of a sedimentary rock where the existing deposits, they end up hardening. They harden together and they form a solid rock. So deposits turning into rocks through a kind of a compaction. That is what is lithification. Lithification is an important process in the entire formation of a sedimentary rock. So how many of them are correctly matched? The answer will be only one pair. So this was a kind of an easy question, so to say. Okay. Terene banding can take place in metamorphic rocks. Okay. Now, thermoregulation is a mechanism through which organisms maintain their body temperatures. There exists a class of organisms which are independent of external sources while regulating their body temperature. So basically, you would have studied under the portion of environment when we talked about the various different types of adaptations. You would have studied about the aspect of homeostasis, right? That is the ability to maintain internal body temperature and the internal fluid requirement. So this is done by two processes. You have thermoregulation, and you also have the fluid regulation inside the body, that is osmoregulation. Right. Now, thermoregulation is something where the organisms, they adapt to the changing environment condition by changing their internal body temperature. Now, this is not something which every organism can achieve. Only a few of them, they are able to do so. Other ones, what they do is they simply conform to the change. Conform to the change. Right. So the ones which conform to the change, for them, survivability in the case of the temperature change, etc., becomes very difficult. The ones who are able to regulate, for example, us humans, when the heat is very high, what do? We start sweating, right? And when you start sweating, when the perspiration happens, that sweat evaporates and provides a kind of a natural cooling, isn't it? Similarly, osmoregulation in our body. When you will find that the temperatures are very low, you will need or you will be thirsty to the lesser level, and you will end up passing urine at a very frequent level. So you are regulating the amount of fluid in your body. So that is how only few species they are able to do so. In the species which are listed here, birds and mammals, they are the ones who are able to achieve the process of thermoregulation, whereas reptiles and amphibians, they are the ones generally who simply conform to the changes. Plant species, they are unable to carry out thermo or osmoregulation. They also conform to the changes. So the answer here will be B, that is 2 and 3 only. Okay. Now, Bhanu, mechanical disruption of the original minerals here. Mechanical means that you have an external factor, a kind of a moving factor which alters the molecular arrangement of sorts. Okay. Why do some birds migrate? Because Meghali, in many of the birds, yes, they are able to thermoregulate, but still, when it comes to breeding, when it comes to availability of food, that is where, in very harsh conditions, when everything is frozen, the food access becomes low. That is when they migrate to the wetland areas. Okay, right? Saurabh, thermoregulation is when you are able to regulate the internal body temperature, and that is done when you have the external conditionalities which go adverse. You are able to regulate the internal body temperature. We humans are able to do so. Okay. Then, which of the following factors aid in the formation of erosional landforms by a river? Erosional landforms. So here again, you have to notice only two factors. That is the speed, and speed is what will end up controlling the carrying capacity. If the speed is high, only then will the carrying capacity be high. And only when the carrying capacity is high, only in those scenarios will you end up observing that they are able to erode significantly. So steep gradient, yes, that will improve the speed. Then the sheer impact of water. Water comes down with a significant amount of force, and that is when they are able to erode, right? They are able to form erosional landforms. So this will also be correct. Abrasion of rock fragments, the present rock fragments which are present, and the existent rock fragments, they also, by the impact and the speed of water, they are also able to create plunge pools and potholes that we have seen they are formed in the youthful stage of the river action. So this is also important in erosional landforms. And dominant downward erosion, again, this leads to formation of gorges and canyons, gorges and valleys as well. Gorges and valleys. Right. Here, potholes and plunge pools. Okay. So here the answer will be D, that is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Steep gradient means that the slope is very high, somewhat like this. Gentle gradient means you have a gradient like this. Okay. Excuse me. Shear impact, Aman, refers to the, it is shear, that is the basic impact, right? The impact created by water due to the force that the water has. Okay. Now, then, with reference to the energy flow in the food chain, consider the following statements. The energy trapped in an organism at successive trophic levels remains the same. This goes against the 10% rule. What is the 10% rule? The 10% rule is that from one trophic level to the other trophic level, only 10% of the energy is transferred. Rest of the amount of energy is consumed for respiration, for other bodily activities, etc. So here you have the energy trapped in an organism at different levels. They can never remain the same. That is why you have the pyramid of energy always happening to be upright, because the amount of energy flowing and existent reduces. So this is incorrect. The major channel of energy flow in an aquatic and terrestrial ecosystem is detritus food chain and grazing food chain, respectively. Now, this is where, when we talk about the major source of energy flow amongst all the biotic components, in the case of a terrestrial food chain, that is the detritus food chain in the terrestrial ecosystem, which is dominant because the organic content is significant and the amount of decomposition which happens is also significant. Whereas in the aquatic ecosystem, the rate of decomposition is further reduced, is significantly reduced. So there you have the grazing food chain, which is very important. So here, this is incorrect. This is basically matched incorrectly. So here you have, which of them are correct? D, neither one nor two. Okay, right? Now, Saurabh, how to remember different kinds of landforms? So, Saurabh, you would have basically observed the landforms with a visual aspect, right? You would have seen in the classes as well that we have, or in the tablets also, we have given the visual and the pictographic representation. Always, I would suggest that visual recollection is something which should be focused upon. Okay. Grazing food chain is when you have the a food chain where grasses or plants, they are the prime producers, right? And detritus food chain is where you have the dead decomposing organic matter that becomes the source of energy. Okay, right? So that is the difference. Now, consider the following statements with reference to volcanoes and volcanic eruption. Composite volcanoes are the most explosive of the Earth's volcanoes. This is incorrect, because when we have the calderas are going to be the most explosive. Calderas. They are the ones which are going to be the most explosive. Then, caldera volcanoes usually erupt and collapse on themselves rather than constructing a new structure. So this is basically correct, because when you have a caldera, at that point of time, it is formed when you have the magma chamber which becomes empty. So that is when the existing volcanic landform, it ends up collapsing on its own weight and creates a caldera-like structure. So this is correct. Temporary cooling is caused by the particles released into the atmosphere during a volcanic eruption. This is again correct. Why? Because the particles which are released, they are able to block the sunshine for a longer duration, and due to that you have significant amount of cooling which is experienced. You also have formation of certain aerosols of sulfur, aerosols of sulfur dioxide. They also reflect back sunlight, and they also bring about cooling. Okay, they also bring about a significant amount of cooling. So that is where, when we talk about the aspect of geoengineering, which you have studied under the portion of environment and ecology, in geoengineering you would have seen that we talk about the aspect of artificial volcanoes which can provide a kind of a cooling. So volcanic activities bring about a temporary cooling phase. So here you have 1 and 3 which are correct. Okay. Right. Then after that, consider the following statements. Volcanic earthquakes are primarily caused due to the release of energy at plate boundary zones. This is incorrect because when we have earthquakes at the plate boundary zones, they are referred to as tectonic earthquakes. Tectonic earthquakes. In the previous one, have we selected the incorrect answer? Okay, my bad. Okay. So here the correct answer will be 2 and 3 only. Okay. Thanks for pointing out, guys. Right. Now, in this one, volcanic earthquakes are primarily caused due to release of energy at plate boundary zone. This is incorrect because you have a kind of a tectonic earthquake which is created as a result of that. Then more earthquakes occur along convergent plate boundaries than divergent plate boundaries. This is going to be correct because whichever type of convergent plate boundary that you consider, that is continental, continental, continental oceanic, 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 in all of them, you have frequent occurrences of earthquakes. Take the case of the Mediterranean to the Himalayan region where convergence is happening, or the circum-Pacific ring of fire. In both of these, you have more earthquakes. So always convergent plate boundaries will experience more earthquakes. So here, the correct answer will be B, that is 2 only. Okay? Right. Yes, Shreya, that is where across the convergent plate boundaries we have the Wadati-Benioff zone as well. Now, consider the following statements. The difference in sunrise time between east and west of a continent. During summer, the day length in the northern hemisphere increases from south to north. Massive ice sheets at higher latitude in both hemispheres. How many statements given above are the consequences of Earth's axial tilt? Right. Now, when we talk about the Earth's axial tilt, here you have to understand that it is the axial tilt which is responsible for the variation in the length of day and night. UPSC has asked this earlier as well, and we have discussed this earlier as well. So here, if let's say we have to put forward the circle of illumination which distinguishes between day and night time, let's suppose. So here, as you move to the higher latitude, you will have a condition as you reach to the region of, let's say, the Arctic Circle, etc. There you will have a condition where you have 4 months of continuous daytime. So the length of the day keeps on increasing. When we talk about the northern hemisphere, increases from south to north, the length of the daytime, that keeps on increasing. So here you have this as the correct. Now, difference in sunrise time between east and west. So even if, let's say, the Earth's actual tilt would not have been present and axis would have been vertical, if the Earth would have rotated even then, because the Earth is consistently rotating from west to east, there again, you would have a difference in terms of the sunrise time. So this is not dependent on the actual tilt. Massive ice sheets at higher latitudes in both the hemispheres. Now, this is something which is correct. Why? Because it is because of the actual tilt of the planet that you have a factorial change in terms of the amount of insolation which is received. And that amount of insolation received, that basically ends up varying as you start moving to the higher latitude. So that is where you have massive ice sheets at higher latitude in both the hemispheres. So this is going to be correct. Okay. So here, when you have KL increase from north to south, It is about increase from south to north. The day length increases from south to north. So this will be the southern point in northern hemisphere. This will be the northern point in northern hemisphere. So the second statement talks about that as you move closer to the poles, the length of the daytime, that keeps on increasing. Okay. So that is the first point, is that in the east the sun rises first and then sunrise happens in the west. For example, Arunachal will always experience sunrise first as compared to Gujarat. So that is nothing to do with the axial tilt. This is something which is basically driven by the rotation of the planet. Rotation of the planet. Okay. Raktim, if you have sent a mail, please be kind enough, send a reminder once. We'll get back to you. Don't worry. How the day length increases, because it depends on the sun position. So here, that is where you have the circle of illumination here. This is where you will have night. This is where you will have day. Right. Now, if you think about it, a position which is in the higher latitudes, that is where a lot of time will be spent in the daytime, in the exposure to sunlight. So hence, the day length will be more. That is why when you go to Northern Europe or when you go to the Arctic region, you have 4 months of continuous daytime. You don't have night time in these cases. Okay. So here you have two statements which are correct. Okay. Now, consider the following statements with reference to speciation in biodiversity. So, speciation is basically a simplistic terms with regards to the formation of the species, the evolution of species in general. So, here you have two different types of speciation, that is allopatric and sympatric. Okay. So, this again is a bit on the very factual difficult side. So, here, in case you face these kinds of questions, guys, and in the test series where you are unable to score on the basis of these questions, let's say you have not come across, that should not worry you. In fact, after looking at the explanation, after looking at the answer, this should always be added to your existing knowledge base. Okay, always keep that in mind. So, when we talk about allopatric speciation, this is when you have species which evolve over a period of time. Now, oftentimes you will find that different species, they are basically differentiated based upon their location and the geographical barriers that they face. In certain cases, you have the evolution across the lands connected to each other. So that is where the evolution is very fast. But when you have, let's say, for example, you take the case of Galapagos Island. Galapagos Island is situated where? On the northwestern part of South America. So there you have many different species which have basically evolved over a period of time when they are separated geographically from the other species across the other mainland. Take the case of Java, Sumatra, Indonesia, in that entire region. Now, at one point of time in the geological history of the planet, these were areas were connected to the mainland of Eurasian landmass. So many species, they went there, but eventually, as these areas they separated due to the lack of or due to the increase in water level during the intermittent ice ages, that is when these species got isolated. So when you have a geographical isolation bringing about a speciation and influencing the speciation, that is referred to as allopatric speciation. So here, allopatric always refers to the speciation which is arrived at when you have a geographical isolation taking place, right? So refers to the formation of new species where the genetic modifications are based on a single ancestor. This is incorrect, right? Now, sympatric is basically what is defined by the first one. You have a single ancestor, and across the land, across a large area, you have a common evolution. So in this, the speciation, the rate of speciation is very, very fast. Very quickly, new species will evolve, they will be adapting to the changing conditions, etc. Whereas in the case of allopatric, the same species might end up developing different features. They might end up developing different sizes as well. And the adaptations might also be very different. For example, even in humans, I hope we are aware that even in humans we have different races. So not now that we have intermingled and commingled for many thousand years, but earlier these races were different because they evolved due to the geographical isolation in many areas. Many of them, they basically remained in a particular island-like structure. So the evolution happened at a different rate. So that is allopatric. Allopatric will always refer to the geographical aspect. Geographical isolation. Okay. Sympatric speciation occurs when one species becomes two due to geographical barriers such as land separation, mountain formation, or human interface. This is incorrect because sympatric is when you have the same ancestor, and that is when you have the speciation into different types. So both of them, they are basically describing each other's methodology. So here you have which of them are correct. The answer will be D. That is neither one nor two. Both of them are incorrect. Okay. Yes, Darwin finches, squirrels in Grand Canyon, these are example of allopatric speciation. Okay. Then consider the following statements with reference to the process of weathering. Now we do know weathering is of various types. You have physical weathering, chemical weathering, biological weathering. You have different types of weathering actions which take place. So when we talk about weathering, here we have also seen, and we basically know that any kind of weathering out there in the nature, out there in the environment, it is not as if a weathering acts independently. You have multitude of processes. If a raindrop or if an area receives significant amount of rainfall, you might have the chemical dissolution taking place in that region. So hydrolysis, in hydrolysis, a new solution is formed as chemicals of rock interact with water. Hydrolysis is a kind of a chemical weathering. Chemical weathering, right? The chemical actions here, they are responsible. So in hydrolysis, as the term hydro refers, there is involvement of water. So water starts dissolving materials. For example, you have limestone rich rock beds. There, in the presence of water, the calcium carbonate will be dissolved in by water, thereby creating hollow structures, eventually weakening the rock and leading to a kind of a weathering action. So new solution is formed as chemicals in rock interact with water. Correct. In oxidation, rocks containing iron, they turn to rust. Rust, we know, is nothing but iron oxide. So when we talk about oxidation, that is where iron combines with oxygen to form rust. This slowly and steadily expands and covers the entirety of the rock face, and that is when the rust is generally weaker. The iron oxide is weaker than the elemental iron. That is when the rocks, they get weakened. So this is where again it is correct. Now, rocks having a high percentage of carbonates, they are more susceptible to biological weathering. This is incorrect. Why? Because when you have a high percentage of carbonates which are present, that will lead to a kind of a chemical weathering. Chemical weathering. By the process of hydrolysis, water will start dissolving the materials. So which of them or how many statements given above are correct? You have only two statements which are correct in this case. Okay. Now, consider the following statements with reference to productivity in an ecosystem. what is the productivity. So you have primary productivity, secondary productivity, etc. So primary productivity is the one which is produced by the autotrophs. The autotrophs, for example, you have the various different plants, they generate organic matter by the process of photosynthesis, that is primary productivity. You have the secondary productivity where the existent organisms, they produce the organic matter, which in turn feeds many different types of animals and organisms in turn. So, while a constant input of solar energy is required in the case of primary productivity, it doesn't influence secondary productivity. This is incorrect, because the secondary productivity in itself is dependent upon solar energy, temperature, salinity conditions, acidity conditions, etc. So when we talk about secondary productivity, it is dependent upon solar energy, temperature, salinity, right? pH value, etc. Okay, so solar energy will be required both in the primary as well as in the secondary productivity. Now, the energy used during the respiration process in plants adds to their net primary productivity. Now, even if, let us suppose, I don't know anything about net primary productivity, but the energy consumed in respiration, can that be added to productivity ever? No, because this is the energy consumed. I'm not producing anything as a result of it. So always keep in mind that when we talk about net primary productivity or NPP, this is basically equal to gross primary productivity minus the energy consumed during respiration. That is what gives you the net primary productivity. So this is incorrect because it is not adds, it is basically subtracted to the gross primary productivity. Then coastal ecosystems have lesser productivity than open ocean. Now, when we talk about coastal ecosystems, these will form a kind of an ecotone, right? Now, when you have a kind of an ecotone will always have a greater productivity as well. So, due to the presence of edge effect in ecotones, you also observe edge effect. And due to the edge effect, what do you have? Number of species is higher, right? So in this, which of the statements are incorrect? Here you will have all the statements which end up being incorrect. Okay? Then, after that, it is a transitional zone between two or more adjacent ecosystems, and it is marked by richer biodiversity than the bordering ecosystems. It is found in both terrestrial and aquatic systems and is sometimes considered to be dynamic zones of interactions between communities. So, the transitional zone between two or more adjacent ecosystem, that is what we define as an ecotone. So when we talk about an ecotone, generally you will find that this is where you have a transition. So for example, you will find that from the kind of a forested ecosystem to a kind of a desert ecosystem, you have grassland ecosystem in between. That is a kind of an ecotone, right? You have marshlands in between the river as well as in the terrestrial, that marshland, that will be the ecotone. So that is what we have seen. In ecotone, you will always have greater number of species which shall be present. That is what is referred to as edge effect, where you have more number of species being able to survive in that region. Okay. Now, otherwise, the ecological niche that we have, what is ecological niche? Ecological niche is the perfect ecological conditions in terms of the biotic factors and the abiotic factors which a species will require for its survivability and for thriving. Similarly, ecological guild, a series of those species which require similar conditions to grow, similar conditions to adapt. Ecological habitat, the abiotic conditions required for a species to be able to thrive. So ecotone is the transition zone. Okay. Now, then, which one of the following is most likely to happen if one would travel from Vladivostok to Alaska, crossing the Bering Strait? Now, Vladivostok is present where? It is present in Siberia, right? It is present when we talk about, now this is a question regarding the international dateline, right? It is about international dateline. Okay. So you have a kind of a irregular feature like this. Now Vladivostok will be to the east of international dateline or to the west of international dateline. What do you think? See, in this question, if you get it incorrect, it will be primarily because of that direction thing. So it will be to the west, right? And when you are going to Alaska, that will be to the east. Now, if you are moving from Vladivostok to Alaska, you are crossing the international dateline from west to east. So overall, let's suppose here you are basically experiencing, let's say, 30th November. In Alaska, they would still be experiencing 29th November. So that is when you go there. Basically, in your watches, in your calendar, you will have to subtract a day. But in your life, you end up gaining a day. You end up living the 30th of November twice. That is why it is said that a person will end up gaining a day. So the answer will be A in this case. Okay? Right? Then, consider the following pairs. Which of them are incorrectly matched? Okay, guys, here and there might be a case where, let's say, the answer, but I hope that you are able to understand what is correct or incorrect here. Please don't stick that he has said C, but it was asked correctly, he has said B. I hope that you are able to discern it from each and every option, that what this option means. That should be the prime motive here. Okay, because we are not going to discuss each and every question here. So for that, you have the answer sheet with you. Okay. Now, then we have considered the following pairs, the biotic interactions and the examples that we have, and we have to find out which of them are incorrectly matched. So parasitism. Parasitism is what? Under parasitism, you have one of the species which completely lives off the other species. You have the host and the parasite. The host is damaged and the parasite basically thrives. So malaria caused by the bite of female Anopheles or the Anopheles mosquito, that is where the parasites, they are released. So this is a kind of a parasitism in general. Commensalism. Commensalism is what? Under commensalism, one species will benefit, whereas for the other species, it makes no difference at all. That is what is commensalism. One will benefit, the other is unaffected. So here, one benefits, other is unaffected. Right? So here, rumen bacteria living in the digestive tract of cows, that is not commensalism, that is mutualism in fact. Birds feeding on insects turned up by grazing mammals, this is commensalism. For example, in many of the cases, you have barnacles. Barnacles, they associate and attach themselves to larger fishes, sharks, whales, etc. Right? Even tortoises. Now, these barnacles, they attach themselves. They are filter feeders. Now, as the sharks, they or the large whales, they end up moving, the barnacles end up moving along with them. And eventually, they end up trapping the nutrients that they require. So, for the large whale, the barnacles are not posing any problem or benefit. But for the barnacles, they are benefiting. So, that is commensalism. So, this is incorrectly matched. Mutualism. Mutualism is when both of them are benefited. For example, you have corals and the zooxanthellae, the algae which grows, that is mutualism. Rumen bacteria living in the digestive tract of cows, this is again mutualism, where you will have the condition that the bacterium, they gain access to food, whereas the cows, by the action of these bacterium, the cows are able to digest the complex carbohydrates that they consume in the form of the plants and the grasses, because the plants and the grasses, they have very complex cellulose which needs to be broken in order to be digested. That is where the rumen bacteria comes into play. So here this is again incorrectly matched. And then you have amensalism. Amensalism is what? In this, one benefits, other is damaged, or one is rather unharmed and you have other damaged. Yes, Mohammed, mutualism means a kind of a symbiotic relationship. So black walnut secreting juglone, that is basically a kind of an amensalism, where for the black walnut, it does not make a difference, but then these secretions, they will impact the nearby plant species. So this is correctly matched. So here we have to find out which of them are incorrectly matched. So you have two pairs, that is 2 and 3, they are incorrectly matched. Okay. Then this is a question regarding current affairs, so to say. So this desert is located in the tropical zone, right? That is within the tropics. Now, when you have within the tropics, then out of these, which option can you automatically eliminate? Which amongst these are not present in the tropical zone amongst the options which are given? Very good. Patagonian desert. It is present where? Around the region of South America in the temperate zone. Also, Satyam. Very good. You have Thar desert. It is situated beyond the tropics. It is present in the subtropical zone, so to say. Okay. Now, so you have either Sahara or Thiri desert. This desert is located in the tropical zone. Red sand dunes are the characteristics of these deserts. Again, red sand dunes, Sahara, you don't have the presence of red sand dunes. It consists of sediments that are made up of marine deposits and have very low water and nutrient retention capacity. There exist iron-rich heavy minerals like ilmenite, magnetite, garnet, hypersthene, and rutile. So this is basically the Thiri desert, which is present in the Thoothukudi region of Tamil Nadu. That is where you have the presence of this coastal desert. Now, this is a desert because typically during the southwest advancing monsoon, this is a region where you have the winds parallel to it. There is no orogenic rainfall or a kind of a cyclonic rainfall as well. That is something which doesn't happen here. So that is where Thiri desert in the region of Tamil Nadu will be the answer. Okay. It was recently in news because of analysis of southwest monsoon. That is why this was a desert which was in news. Okay. Then, with reference to the geological time scale, what is the correct chronological sequence of the following events? Now, in this kind of question, always, guys, when we have studied about the aspect of the evolution of Earth, when we have talked about the evolution of atmosphere, those are the factors you have to take notice of. That will make these kinds of questions very easy. Now, origin of unicellular organisms, start of the formation of the Himalayas, formation of coral beds, start of the formation of Deccan traps, coal beds rather, not coral beds, and formation of oceans. So out of all these, which has happened the earliest? The formation of oceans happened close to around 3.7 billion years back. After the phase of degasification came the phase of torrential rainfall. That is when the oceans came into existence. So this will happen first, right? Then the life started to originate in the oceans itself. So initially you had chemosynthetic cyanobacterium and the blue-green bacterium which started coming into existence. So origin of unicellular organisms, that will be the second event. Then close to around 350 to 400 million years back, that is when large vegetation came into existence. Those vegetations and those basically the fossils of those trees, they got deposited, and that is how you had the formation of the older coal seams, the anthracite coal. So that what you find in the Appalachians on the eastern part of North America, in Australia, in Indonesia, in South Africa, the anthracite coal beds that you have, they were formed 350 million years back. So this is what will form the next event. Then amongst the start of formation of Himalayas and start of formation of Deccan traps, which was earlier, Deccan traps were formed earlier, as you had the Indian landmass and the Indian plate moving northwards while it was crossing the region of Indian Ocean. That is when you had a kind of a volcanic eruption, and that is where the Deccan traps were created. So you have 4 and then you have 2. Okay, so answer in this case will be B, 51342. Okay, again, this will be in the category of easy. Okay, no reason why you should commit mistakes in these kinds of questions. Coal bed basically means the coal deposits that you have, right, when they were created. Harchand, respiration is what you carry out, the breathing activity. Even the plants carry out respiration at night. During day, they carry out photosynthesis. During night, they carry out respiration. Respiration means when you consume oxygen and you use that for the production of energy in the form of adenosine diphosphate and triphosphate. That is where in your cell the mitochondria comes into play, and you give out carbon dioxide in return. Okay. Right? Now, with reference to the Circum-Pacific Belt, recently in the news, consider the following statement. Now, it is an area characterized by active volcanoes and earthquakes occurring due to the subduction of continental plate under oceanic plate. This will never happen. Never will you find the continental plate getting subducted. Why? Continental plates will always be lighter, they will have lesser density, whereas the oceanic plates, being the heavier one, they will undergo subduction. So the first statement will be incorrect. Then Mariana Trench and Tonga Trench, they are located along the Circum-Pacific Belt. Tonga Trench, if you recall, this year you had the Tonga eruption, the Hunga Tonga, Hunga Hapai eruption happening in the South Pacific. That is where you have the Tonga Trench. And Mariana Trench is to the eastern part of the Philippine plate. This is the deepest point on the planet's surface, almost more than 10 kilometers deep below the sea level. So both of them, they are created as a result of oceanic convergence. So here, this is located along the Circum-Pacific Belt. That will basically bring 2. That is the correct answer. Okay? Again, an easier question. Now, consider the following statements with reference to the seismic waves. Seismic waves, we have the energy which is emitted whenever you have the earthquakes happening, the energy which is given out that travels in the form of seismic waves. So the S waves can travel through solid, liquid, and gaseous material. Incorrect. Why? Because in the case of S waves, the movement of the particles, always remember this, guys, movement of particles is perpendicular to the direction of wave propagation. Right? So that is why the speed is also low and they are unable to move significantly. So this is where you will always find that the S waves, they are only able to travel through solid. That is why the shadow zone of the S waves, they are particularly larger as well. Now, P waves, they travel faster than the S waves. Absolutely correct. P waves, they travel almost around 1.7 to 2 times in certain cases faster than the S waves. So 2 is correct, 1 is incorrect. Automatically, you can eliminate where 1 is given. We know 2 is correct. Now, the Rayleigh waves, they cause the majority of the shaking felt during the earthquake. So Rayleigh waves, they are a type of surface wave. Surface wave. Now, surface wave, they are classified into two types. You have love waves and you have Rayleigh waves. Now, this classification is done on the basis of what kind of movement the Earth's surface experiences. Both of them, they cause a lot of disaster. Okay, so yes, they are damage causing. Now, deeper earthquakes. Now, let's assume I did not know this answer, whether Rayleigh waves. Let's assume I did not know about Rayleigh waves. But look at the two options available. In both of them, 2 and 3 are correct. So that is where, even in those factual portions where you are unaware about it, that is how you basically end up validating your answer, validating your information source as well. Now, deeper earthquakes. When we say deeper earthquakes, that means earthquakes where the focus is significantly deeper, reduces the speed of the surface waves and the associated damage. Obviously, when you will have, let's say this is the surface, an earthquake which is occurring at, let's say, 700 kilometers or 500 kilometers to the depth, there, by the time it reaches the surface and that generates a surface wave, automatically the impact will be less. Whereas if an earthquake occurs here, it will hit the surface immediately and the surface wave generated will be quite intense. So that is why deeper earthquakes means deep focus, right? Reduces the speed of the surface wave and the associated damage. That is correct. So the correct answer in this case will be D, that is 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now, next, with reference to grassland ecosystem, consider the following statements. Now, this is, by the way, even though it is mentioning grassland ecosystem, this is a question purely of geography. Okay. So their presence is limited to the tropical regions of the world. Now, limited to the tropical regions of the world. Can that be correct? No, because we do have the tropical grassland in the form of savanna. For example, Campos and Llanos, Llanos in Venezuela, Campos in Brazil, etc. But we also have the temperate grassland, prairies, steppes, downs, veld, Canterbury. These are the examples of temperate grassland. So they are not restricted to only the tropical regions. Okay. Now, again, look at the options. You have to find out the correct answer. We know that 1 is incorrect. Remove 1. So it is either 2 and 3 or 2. So you know that 2 is going to be correct. It is the third statement where you have to validate whether that is correct or incorrect. But the second, the height of vegetation on grassland varies with the availability of rainfall. That is absolutely correct. Because if the availability of rainfall is present, suddenly the grasses, they will be able to grow in size. So this is correct. In India, except in mountainous and desert regions, these can be found across the country, except in mountainous and desert areas. Now, in mountainous areas, do we have the presence of grasses in India? When you would have studied Indian geography, particularly the Himalayan region, you would have studied about the summer grasslands, particularly in Middle Himalayas. What is the name of the grassland that you would have studied? Very good. It is basically bugyals. In the mountains, we find bugyals. Right? So that is where you do find the existence of these particular grasses even in the region of mountains. So this is incorrect. So 3 is incorrect. That means the answer will be D. That is 2 only. Across these mountainous grasslands is where you have the transhumance activity which is carried on by the Bakarwals, Bhotias, Gujjars, right? So that is where you have the transhumance activities which are carried on. Then, with reference to the alluvial fans, consider the following statements. Alluvial fans. Alluvial fans are created in which stage of the river? In which stage of the river? The youthful, mature, or the old stage? Where do you find the creation of alluvial fans? Okay. Mostly it is found in youthful stage, right? The alluvial fans that you will observe, these alluvial fans that you will observe, mostly you will find them to be present in the youthful stage. So suppose a river basically is coming down the slope of the mountain. As it is coming down the slope of the mountain, its speed will be very high. It will be able to carry a lot of things, lot of materials, large rocks, boulders, etc. As soon as it encounters the plain region, that is where the deposits will start happening. And that is where it ends up creating a large depositional fan-like structure. That is what is an alluvial fan, right? So this is a large depositional structure where the river in itself that gets divided into various streams because of the deposits that are carried out. And eventually it combines again. So this is what you have as the alluvial fan. Himalayan rivers such as you have Kosi, they end up forming very extensive and very large alluvial fans. In the case of Kosi, the alluvial fan has got a kind of a width of around 8 kilometers. So that is where the alluvial fans created. They are very extensive. Now, these are erosional landforms formed by fast flowing rivers. Absolutely incorrect. You know that one is incorrect. Eliminate wherever one is given. Again, the same predicament 2 or 2 and 3. So 2 will be correct. Presence of alluvial fans can aid in causing floods. Absolutely. Because these alluvial fans, they will end up having deposits in the path of the river channel. So the more deposits that you have, the lesser amount of volume is available for the river flow. So the river will overflood. And that is when you have a kind of a flooding action which is caused. So this is correct. They are not found in deserts or regions with dry climate. This is again, basically, when you think about it, incorrect. They can be found even in dry climate, these deposits will be present. It can be present. So this is incorrect here, right? The profile of the alluvial fan, that will be different in the case of desert and dry climate, where if you have a dry climate, the deposits will have a kind of a vertical profile. If it is a rainy area, the deposits will be flattened almost. So here the answer will be C, that is 2 only. One is not correct, Shubham. One is not correct. One is incorrect. Okay. Anil, are alluvial fans form near the delta area? See, the alluvial deposits are there, but the name fan, that is when you have a kind of a semicircular deposit of large rocks and debris. It is generally observed in the youthful stage. Okay. Manoj, the third option. Third option is, can it be found in dry areas? Absolutely yes. Why not? Manisha, if you have a kind of a mountainous landform in desert and dry area, it can form alluvial fan, right? Shubham, one is basically, here it is written erosional landform. Alluvial fans are depositional landforms. They are not erosional. That is why the first option is incorrect. Yes, they are formed near Bhabur region. Okay. Now, in which one of the following biogeochemical cycles are both weathering and outgassing the main sources of release of nutrients into the cycle? So, weathering event. If weathering event is a main source, then it will be a kind of a sedimentary cycle. I hope that we know this much, that biogeochemical cycles, they are divided into two types. You have gaseous cycle and you have sedimentary, right? The sedimentary one is inefficient, takes larger amount of time, etc. Gaseous ones, for example, carbon cycle, water cycle, nitrogen cycle, these are the ones which happen quickly, and there you have the greater involvement of atmospheric processes, right? So if you have weathering event, weathering means the rocks are breaking, so automatically it will be a sedimentary. In sedimentary, we have two types. You have either phosphorus or you have the sulfur cycle. These are the only two types of sedimentary cycles that we have studied, right? Now, out of these, when we say outgassing, what is outgassing? Outgassing is when you have emergence or eruption of gases through the process of volcanic eruption. That is what is outgassing. Now, during the process of volcanic eruption, one of the major gases which are released are what? SO2. That is what provides a temporary cooling effect as well by forming aerosols. So that is where it will be the sulfur cycle, which will, so that is why sulfur is mined in the regions of active volcanoes. That is where in the region of Indonesia, you have, under very dangerous circumstances, people working day in and day out near the active volcanoes. They basically extract sulfur. So volcanism and the mineral associated with it, always sulfur. Phosphorus is something basically locked in the older rocks, generally on the rock beds, etc., or on the sea beds, etc. And that is when eventually in the older areas where the rocks, they get uplifted, from there by the process of weathering, phosphorus is something which is extracted. Okay, so weathering and outgassing, if both of them are involved, sulfur cycle will be the answer. Okay. Now, which one of the following correctly describes the term buffering capacity of the earth? Buffering capacity. This is not the internet or the online buffering that you have. Surface to react to the various different changes that you have in terms of the changes or absorption and production of H plus as well as OH minus ions which are present. H plus ions, they will control what? They will contribute to acidity, whereas when you have OH minus ions, that will contribute to alkalinity. So we do know that the oceans, there the alkaline value and the alkalinity level, that keeps on changing. Similarly is the case with the soil conditions as well. And when you would have studied about the phase of mass extinctions in environment, you would have studied that we have suffered from a phase of mass extinction due to sudden rise in the ocean acidic level. So even as of now, the oceans, they are turning slightly acidic, even though they are still alkaline. So when we say buffering capacity, it is the resistance or the ability to absorb or to release H plus and OH minus ions. So resistance to pH change in soil and water bodies on earth. So alkalinity and the acidity level in oceans and on the soil, that is what is referred to by the buffering capacity. Okay, this is again a simple straightforward one. Now, which of the following can be considered regulating services provided by an ecosystem? So ecosystem and the environment around us, that provides various different types of services. You have the provisioning services under which genetic resources are provided. You have the regulating services under which the rate of productivity, the rate of decomposition, the rate of production, etc. All of that is controlled, right? Then you have cultural services, etc. So providing genetic resource, all this comes under regulating services, provisioning services. All this, they come under the larger subheading of ecosystem or ecological services. Okay, so under this you have various different aspects. Provisioning is what? When you provide something, when something is provided by the ecosystem. So newer genetic sources. So providing genetic resources. You are providing something. Can it be regulation? No. It will be provisioning services. So this is under provisioning service. Provisioning services. Right. So it will not come under regulating service. One is eliminated. One is eliminated. Eliminate the options where one is given. 2 and 3 or 3 and 4. Now transfer of pollen grains from one area to another, that will in a way regulate the growth of population. That will in a way regulate speciation as well. Right? Mutualism, symbiotic impact, all of this is basically driven by that. So 2 will be correct. If 2 is correct, automatically you know you can eliminate option C because 2 is not present. So just by the first 2 options itself, you can arrive at your answer. Okay? Use this for the portions of environment, science and tech, etc., where you find certain factual questions coming. Breakdown and decomposition of organic material, again, regulates the productivity, regulates the availability of component and nutrients within the ecosystem. So this will again be in the regulating services. Then you have genetic erosion, right? Removal of certain genetics, extinction of sorts. Now, can that be an ecosystem service? No, it is not a service. Removal of anything is not a service. So this will be absolutely incorrect. So the correct answer will be B, 2 and 3. So that is how you have to basically think about it. Each and every option you have to spend some time. Spend some time in each option, you will reach the answer. Most of the times, why do we commit mistakes is we are in a hurry. We look at an option and immediately we start stressing out that this is correct, incorrect, let me know fast. look at all the options carefully. It is not necessary you would have read it somewhere. You might not have read it somewhere. Still, can you make a basic inference of the terms? And then can you arrive at the answer? That is the approach which will carry you in the prelims. Just depending upon what you have studied in the book and expecting the questions to be appearing in the exam, that will never lead you to succeed in the prelims exam. Because regardless of how much you prepare, at the end of the day, you cannot expect yourself to observe more than 40 to 45 direct questions. More than that, you do need to solve by applying your logical skill, your analytical skill of inferring the question there itself and trying to solve it by logic. Okay. Now, consider the following pairs: nature of species and the characteristics that we have. Endemic species. Endemism. Endemism is what? When a particular plant species or an animal species is to be found in a particular area and nowhere else. That is endemism. Endemism is of significant utility where? When you have to declare a region as biodiversity hotspot, when you have to declare a country as a mega diverse country, right, in those areas, or when you have to basically declare a region as a biological reserve, there also endemism comes into play, that how many species are endemic in that region, be it vascular plants, be it certain animal types, etc. So endemic species, a species found only in certain geographical areas and not found anywhere else, correctly matched, right? Invasive species, which have invaded an area and now they have become a problem. So, a species that has entered an area not native to its origin and becomes a threat to the native species by growing rapidly. This is correct, right? We have looked at the case of, or you would have studied about the case of the Burmese python and the kind of invasion that they carried out in North America, particularly in the state of Florida in United States. You have eucalyptus in many tropical countries. Eucalyptus has been an invasive species. Then keystone species. Keystone species are those which are particularly important for the survivability of the entire ecosystem and the various trophic levels, which is very, very important, right? So, a species whose presence, absence, and abundance reflects a specific environmental condition. This is incorrectly matched, right? A species that has a disproportionately large effect on the communities in which it occurs, that is a keystone species. Example, tiger. If you remove tiger from the ecosystem, the deer population, the herbivore population will start expanding explosively. They will all be attacking the same plants, and basically they will end up overgrazing, and due to competition, the plants, they will also not be able to survive, and the deer population, due to competition, they will also start starving. That is where you do need such keystone species. So we know that 3 is basically incorrectly matched with 4, so automatically 4 will also be incorrectly matched. Having said that, when we say sentinel species, these are a kind of indicator species of sorts. So they reflect a specific environmental condition. For example, lichens. Lichens will always give you an idea about the amount of air pollution, the sulfur content, etc., which is present. So that is where that is a kind of a sentinel species. So how many are correctly matched? You have only 2 pairs which are correctly matched. Okay? Right? Now, then, consider the following statement. Lichens are and grasses are important vegetation in this biome. Lichens, mosses and lichens, they exist where? In which kind of biome? When you think about it. Very good, Shreya. It is basically the tundra biome, right? So that is where you have the tundra biome. Some animals in this biome change the color of their fur seasonally. The climatic conditions of this biome allow only a short growth period of the vegetation. and precipitation is limited to summer months. All this ends up defining the tundra biome in general. Vishnu, keystone species. First of all, understand what is a keystone. What is the meaning of the term keystone? Keystone is basically in architecture, in a kind of a building architecture. Keystone is that portion of the building. If you remove them, the entire building will collapse, right? So keystones are, in the case of arches, etc., that is where keystone comes in. So for example, when you think about any species, for example, any carnivore, and take the case of, for example, tiger population. In the grazing food chain, tigers are very important, right? Because you have grasses consumed by deer, deers are consumed by tigers. The tigers ensure that you have limited number of deers available. Otherwise, imagine a scenario where you have no tigers or no such carnivores present, and you have deer, which is basically feeding upon the grasses. After some time, the grasses will be extinct, the deer population will be so high, there is nothing to keep them in check, that due to undue competition or undesirable competition, even the deer population will start declining. So the ecosystem crumbles. The presence of a tiger ensures a maintenance of that. That is why keystone. Okay. Flagship species, Aman, are basically those which give you a kind, or they are generally associated with larger message which is conveyed. For example, tigers, panda, all of them, they are associated now with what? As mascots of animal conservation, biodiversity conservation. That is flagship. Which of the following factors generally favors the formation of deltas? Now, deltas are created where? In the old stage of the river movement, right? So that is where the speed will be very limited. There will be only deposition, no erosion at all. So, active vertical and lateral erosion in the upper course of the river, in the youthful stage. How will that favor the formation of delta? This will increase the amount of deposits which are carried. So, amount of deposits will be high. Amount of deposits will be high. In case the deposits are less, or the material which is carried by the river, that is less, deltas will not be created, estuaries will be created. For example, in the case of Narmada and Tapi, they move through a rift valley. So lateral and vertical erosion is very restricted. That is why they don't have enough materials to form large deltas. Tideless coast, where you don't have so much amount of tide. So this again favors a kind of a deposition, right? So both of them are correct. Analyze the options. There is only one option out there in which both 1 and 2 are correct. That will be your answer. Always keep a lookout on the answers and the option. With each option, look at it. With each particular statement, look at it, whether you are closer to your answer or not. Okay. Shallow sea adjacent to the delta. Again, if you have shallow sea, deposition will be very significantly greater, right? And the delta formation will be observed. No strong current in the river mouth. This will again facilitate deposition. So all the 4 of them are correct. So that is where you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now, with reference to weathering, consider the following statements. The weathering process of cryofracturing is most effective in low latitudes. Now, what do we mean by cryofracturing? Cryofracturing is basically the aspect where, let's say, you have a larger rock and you have, in the presence of a crack, let's say, water has penetrated. Now, cryo means ice or frozen state. Cryofracturing means that during nighttime or during the winter season, this water gets converted into ice. Now, ice will always end up occupying a larger volume as compared to liquid water. Now, when it occupies a larger volume, there will be expansion. So, the cracks will significantly widen, they will deepen. And again the next morning or again during the daytime, winter season, again refreezing will happen. So that is how, by the process of repeated formation of ice, that is when the expansion of cracks they happen. So weathering process of cryofracturing is most effective in low latitude, that is closer to the equator. Incorrect. Generally observed in high latitude and high altitude. High latitude and high altitude, where you have sub-zero temperature of sorts. Okay. Chemical weathering is least likely to occur in humid tropical climate. This is again, what do you think? Is it correct or is it incorrect? Humid tropical climate, right? Perfect. This is incorrect. Because in the humid tropical climate, you will have frequent occurrences of rainfall. Frequent occurrences of rainfall will promote a kind of hydrolysis action, the chemical dissolution, as well as oxidation, etc. Right? So when you have humid tropical conditions, any material that you keep outside, you will find immediately rust is also formed, isn't it? But during extreme winter conditions, you will not observe the metals to be corroding so easily. But in humid conditions, materials will also corrode. So the similar logic you apply in the case of rocks as well. So rocks are basically mineral aggregates. So chemical processes are always initiated at an accelerated rate in humid tropical climate. So this is again incorrect. So which of them are incorrect? You have, which of them are correct rather? You have D, neither one nor two. Okay. Therein, sentinel species are like indicator species. They give you an indication of the ecosystem in which they survive, in which they live. Ovia, latitude and altitude. Altitude refers to as height. Latitudes are basically, you would have read 50° north, 60° north, 70° north. Those are latitudes. These basic portions need to be covered. Which of the following are the functions of a wetland? Wetland, when we talk about, then balancing of hydrological cycle or water cycle. Yes. Stabilization of the food web. They will give new sources of food for many animals, many grazing animals, many bird species, aviary animals. So yes, 1 and 2 both are correct. Eliminate the two options. Preventing shoreline erosion, they provide a kind of a buffer of sorts. So the wave action that is not so significant, that is reduced. So yes, they prevent shoreline erosion. Biological fixation of methane. Methane is trapped by these wetlands. That is why evaporation of water in these wetlands, they have a significant danger of release of methane into the atmosphere. Correct. Then removal of nitrogen and phosphorus and other contaminants from the water that is basically trapped in the case of a river flow and attached to the ground. So removal of them from the surface water. So this is where all of them, that is D, is going to be correct. Okay. Hoshiar, yes, Ashish, this was an easy one. You find easy ones. See, it is basically finding those 25 to 30 easy ones that you have to ensure you don't get that incorrect. In others, try to get it correct. That is how you will increase your marks. In fourth statement, methane is emitted by wetland. See, methane is emitted in the case of wetland, Hoshiar, when the water evaporates. As long as water is present, they will be trapping with the presence of certain microbes that will be present in the submerged area. That is where the methane will be fixed. Okay. Satvika, they basically remove the wetlands because they have water which stagnates in a region. So that is where they are able to remove the contaminants. So nitrogen and phosphorus here, they are acting as contaminants. Okay. Chidamula, does wetland cause greenhouse gas emission? Yes. Once the water is evaporated, they will cause greenhouse gas emissions as well. If a lake is described as eutrophic, which of the following is most likely its characteristics? Eutrophic. So you have mesotrophic and eutrophic. Eutrophic means an abundance of nutrients, right? Abundance of nutrients. Okay, that is what is eutrophic. So when we say abundance of nutrients, that is where eventually that will lead to harmful algal bloom. Algal bloom, right? Harmful algal bloom. That can lead to oxygen getting drained out and conditions of hypoxia, lack of oxygen in the water body, right? So here, lower nutrient enrichment, incorrect. Nutrient load is high, right? Eliminate where 1 is given. Now, either it is 3 and 5 or 2, 3 and 5, right? So 2 is the deciding statement. High dissolved oxygen content. The amount of dissolved oxygen is high. But in the case of eutrophic, you have hypoxia, lack of oxygen. Incorrect. So by looking at the first two statements itself, you have reached the correct answer. Okay. So the presence of only warm water fish species, correct. Fewer planktonic growth, planktons are algae, you will have algal bloom, so they will be more. Higher sedimentation at the bottom, eventually that is how the dead algae, they start getting deposited at the bottom as well. So this is correct. So you have 3 and 5, which is going to be correct. Okay. Now, which of the following can be considered a direct source of knowing about the interior of Earth? Now, we know when we talk about the interior of Earth, you have the direct source as well as the indirect sources. What are the direct sources? You have mining. Very good, Shreya. Mining, and you have volcanic eruptions. Right? These are the direct sources. What are indirect sources? Seismic waves, study of asteroids, meteors, gravitational waves, study of them, study of magnetic field lines and their changing characteristics. These are indirect sources. So mining of polymetallic nodules under the Deep Ocean Mission of Government of India, this is basically a kind of overcomplication of the statement. This is done to confuse the candidates. Here, you have to basically carry out the process or look at the basic process here. Mining, right? So gives you a direct source of information. Molten material from Barren Island volcano, study of volcanic activities. Again, basically a direct source. Samples of asteroid Ryugu brought under the Hayabusa 2 mission. So this is an indirect source, right? Shadow zones formed by earthquake waves or seismic waves and their study, indirect. So here, how many of the statements given above are correct? You have B, that is 2 statements. This is correct. Mohit, yes, mining and drilling, my dear friend, is generally categorized under the same in the same portion. Because in most of the cases for mining activity, you do drill, isn't it? Right. Now, which of the following types of forests are found in India's Deccan Peninsula biogeographic zone? This is different from Deccan Plateau, guys. Deccan Peninsula is very different from the Deccan Plateau. Many of the times you get confused. So when we say Deccan Peninsula, that is the southern peninsular portion of India. Dry deciduous forest, yes, you find them. on the eastern part of the Western Ghats in the region of Telangana, etc. You do find dry deciduous. So one is correct. One is correct. You know that. Eliminate B and C. Then thorn forest. Again, you will find in Telangana, in portions of Tamil Nadu as well. This is also correct. Semi-evergreen forest. Semi-evergreen forests are found where? In the region again to the eastern part of or in the region of Western Ghats itself, you have evergreen as well as semi-evergreen. So in the southern part of India around Karnataka, Kerala border, there you will find them. So this is correct. Now look at it. 1, 2, 4 and 5 and 1, 2, 3 and 4. So 3 here is correct. Having said that, dry evergreen and alpine. When we say alpine, this is basically something that you find at a greater height, at a greater altitude of 3000 meters and above. So this is incorrect. So 5 won't be there. So that is where the answer will be D. That is 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay. Now, with reference to kelp forest, consider the following statements. Karachola, difference between Deccan Trap and Deccan Peninsula. Deccan Peninsula is the entire peninsular portion of the southern India. Deccan Trap or the Deccan Plateau is those area or the area where you had volcanic eruption at Reunion Islands and causing that entirety of the area of black soil formation that you see today. So you have the region of Maharashtra, southern Madhya Pradesh, southern Gujarat, northern part of Karnataka, some parts of Telangana. So that is your Deccan Trap. Okay. With a reference to kelp forest, consider the following statement. So these are underwater algal growth that you end up finding in the temperate regions of the world. It comprises brown algae found in cold and nutrient-rich water. Correct. It is generally to be found where? In the northern Atlantic. Northwestern Atlantic. That is where you'll find significant numbers. Their presence is restricted to the tropical latitudes of both the hemispheres because you will find them where? You will find them in the region of the temperate areas. You know, 1 is correct, 2 is incorrect. Eliminate the options, right? In this, 1 is not present. In this also, 1 is not present. Automatically, you have the correct answer. These are considered foundation species. The foundation species are the ones which basically modify the ecosystem, create the perfect condition for various different species to come and live in. So this is correct. So the answer will be D, 1 and 3 only. Then consider the following statement with reference to sand dunes. These are the depositional features created in the desert area. So they are formed under the influence of gravity. You have various different sand dunes, the large ones. So many of them, they have, once the speed of the wind reduces, the carrying capacity reduces, the deposition starts, and eventually the gravitational force ensures that you have a series of such deposits which happen. So this is correct. Now, longitudinal dunes are formed. Now again, here you have to find out which are the above statements are incorrect. We know 1 is correct. You have the correct answer even with that. But still, longitudinal dunes are formed when the availability of the sand increases along the flow of the wind in the consistent direction. And transverse dunes are aligned parallel to the wind direction. In fact, when we talk about transverse dunes, they are perpendicular to the wind flow. And when we say longitudinal dunes, that is when you have the winds depositing things like this. These are longitudinal. So both of them are incorrect. Nonetheless, just by looking at the first statement as well, you could have reached your correct answer. So here, which of them are incorrect? You have C, 2 and 3 only. Okay. Now, Which of the following is or are correct with reference to the corals? Hard corals are herbivores. Corals, the hard ones, they consume zooplanktons, right? So they are carnivores rather than herbivores. Again, do the same process, eliminate wherever one is given, eliminate it. Warm water and sunlight, they are prerequisites for the survivability of corals. So this is a kind of a prerequisite only for warm water corals. You do have cold water corals. You do have the example of Rost Reef of the coast of Norway, which is situated in very high latitude. So there you don't have warm water which is present, but still the corals are existent. You have many corals which are to be found, which basically have been found to be growing on the seabed as well, where sunlight is not available. So while they encourage the growth of the corals, but only certain species, does not mean all the corals require them. So 2 is incorrect. So automatically you have one correct answer. Prerequisite means necessary condition. Okay. Soft corals can exist without having a symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. That is correct. Many of the soft corals, they don't enter into the symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae. You have other species, few worms, etc., which live there, and they basically promote the growth of the soft corals. And these soft corals, with the help of their tentacles, they are able to trap their prey as well. So this is correct. So the correct answer in this will be D. Okay. Symbiotic means where both benefit. Both the organisms, they benefit. That is symbiotic, mutualism of sorts. Now, which of the following describes the relationship between the Earth's rotation around its axis and the revolution of Earth in its orbit around the Sun? So both of these events, the Earth's rotation around its axis and its movement around the Sun, both of them are virtually independent of each other. It is not as if the more the Earth rotates, the more it will revolve. It is not as if the more the Earth rotates, less energy will be uh, utilized for revolution. So both of them are basically independent of each other. So the answer in this will be B, that is independent. Okay. Zooxanthellae here refers to the algae with which manufactures the food, and the algae through which the coral species basically get the availability of food and also their distinct coloration pattern. Okay. Then, which of the following processes are involved in the formation of a sedimentary rock? So, in the case of a sedimentary rock, you basically have the process where materials are carried from a region, they are deposited, and those deposits then end up compacting themselves, cementing themselves, solidifying themselves, and eventually forming a hard rock. So lithification, a very important process in the entire formation of sedimentary rock, where you have the deposits, they end up hardening. Lithification is going to be correct. Then you have erosion. Erosion is again important, because unless and until you don't have erosion activity, you will never have the availability of materials which will end up forming those rocks. So erosion provides those materials. Then you have the process of deposition. It is these deposits which will end up forming these rocks, right? Weathering. Weathering process again brings into play the existence of various materials which can be eroded, right? Supplies the materials or deposits. Okay. So weathering, again important, right? And transportation. Eroded materials, they are transported to various different areas and then they are eventually deposited. So that will also be important. So here You have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That is D, all of them playing their own distinct role when it comes to the process of formation of sedimentary rocks. Now, a bit of a factual statement and a factual question. So, consider the following statements with reference to the recently released State of the World's Birds 2022 report. So, why I have picked up this question for discussion is because I want to emphasize here that these reports, if you are serious for this examination, you should keep a track of these reports, note this down in a separate A4 sheet paper, keep on revising it on a weekly, if not a bi-weekly basis. That is where you will be able to revise it at least 10 times by the time that you appear for the exam. So you should be aware of which agency, which body has come up with a report and the major finding, if at all, if any, of this report. That is again something you have to focus upon. So it is an annual publication of the IUCN. That is incorrect, because when it comes to the state of the world's birds, that is something which is done by BirdLife International. BirdLife International. Then it highlighted that more than half of the existing bird species worldwide are declining, are showing a declining trend in population. So this again basically is incorrect. Why? That why this is incorrect is because overall you have close to around 45 to 47% of the bird population indicating a decline. Now here, please don't think about it that do we have to remember 48% or 50%. Why this became famous was, and this came in news, was because the report stated that very soon, if corrective measures are not undertaken, if the flyways, they are not ensured a proper degree of conservation, very soon we will reach a state where more than half of the bird species will be threatened or their population will decline. That is why this statement has been framed. Okay. Khushbu, for the reports, the current affairs, the newspaper that you read on a daily basis should be more than sufficient. As per the report, more threatened bird species are found in tropical regions as compared to temperate regions. This is correct. In general, the number of species and the biodiversity that will be more prominent, more distinct in the tropical regions. So automatically, if within the tropical regions itself, you will have more species which shall be threatened as well. So which of them are incorrect? You have A, 1 and 2, which are incorrect. Okay. Then the last question. It is noted that the Indian plate moved northward after its separation from the Antarctic Australian in the early Cretaceous age. However, the velocity of the Indian plate suddenly increased from the late Cretaceous to the early Eocene period. Now, we have discussed under plate tectonics that the rate of or the speed of movement of the Indian plate was close to around 20 centimeter per year. And it is that accelerated rate which brought Indian plate all the way from the region of Antarctica all the way to its present position. So, which of the following is or are the factors behind the fast drift of the Indian plate? Increase in the lithospheric thickness of the Indian plate. If the thickness will increase, can the speed increase? Think about it. When the mass of a plate will increase, can its speed increase? Ever? No. So that is where this will be incorrect. However, you have to understand, and this is a kind of an additional source of information for you guys, that when the Indian plate was moving, due to the fact that at that point of time you had many volcanic hotspots, Indian plate, when it started passing over these volcanic hotspots, there was, due to the magma and the mantle plume, the lithospheric portion of the Indian plate that started becoming thinner and thinner. It is because of that thinning action that the speed further accelerated. Presence of Reunion Island mantle plume, it provided that necessary push, that acceleration by thinning of the lithospheric plate. Widening of the Neo-Tethys Sea located to the north of Indian plate. If the sea would have widened, Indian plate would have never crashed with the Eurasian landmass. There was a kind of a shrinking because the Tethys plate was subducting underneath the Eurasian landmass. And it is estimated that close to around 5,000 square kilometer of the Tethyan sea floor that underwent a kind of a subduction. That is why the Indian plate's movement was further accelerated. So rather than widening, there was a narrowing effect. Okay. So here you have the answer as C. Okay. How come thinning happened and Jinal? So when you talk about thinning, so see, understand this. Suppose you have the lithospheric region, right? And here is where you have the kind of a magma chamber. So if the mantle plume is quite significant, then this portion will start melting, isn't it? So in this portion, the plate will get slightly thinner. Again, let's say the plate has moved. It has moved here again, it encounters another such mantle plume and another such hotspot. So here again, some thinning will happen. So there were around 4 to 5 such mantle plumes that Indian plate encountered. Reunion mantle plume and the Reunion Island hotspot was just one of them. So when the plates, they get thinner, the speed will automatically increase because the mass reduces. Okay. So that is where we'll be restricting the session for today, right? I hope that you have understood the approach. And see, again, I will tell you guys, please do not worry about the marks scored. Marks will vary. You will score less, you will score more. What you have to analyze is where you are committing mistakes. If you don't analyze that, for every paper that you attempt, you have to spend 1 day analyzing the explanation. It is amongst you guys that students have been able to score more than 130 plus as well. So it is not unachievable. Many of them have been able to score that. It is not unachievable. You have to analyze where you have gone wrong. If there is a content which is lacking, work upon it. Look at the explanation, search upon it, work upon it. If it is about concentration, more practice is needed. But eventually, you will improve. Okay. Now, tideless means, Vishnu, where you don't have significant tidal action, because if you have significant tidal action, whatever deposits the river is carrying will be eroded very easily as well. Sarfaraz, the depth of the lithosphere, that is the crust and the upper mantle, almost 100 kilometers from the surface. Hotspots are those areas, Saurabh, where you have the existence of the volcanic eruptions, right? Generally, the hotspots lie above mantle plume. So mantle plume create the hotspots. Babita, see, there is always, last year we had close to around 30 questions, uh, 35 questions close to, where the questions directly or indirectly, they had a clash with the prelims examination. So it is not to say that you will have all the questions coming, but that is where the questions have been elevated to a certain level of difficulty so that you are used to it. Okay. Tundra biome, Shivanshi, is where you have the portion of in extremely higher latitude or extremely greater altitude, very low conditions, almost permafrost condition. That is a tundra biome. So whatever growth happens only in the short summer period. Shubham, what should be our approach for the next 6 months? Finish it, finish the syllabus, and revise. Unless and until you carry out periodic revision, it is not worth it, right? At least every subject that you have studied, you have to revise and you practice them. How? By taking up these tests. So that answers the question put by Hoshiar as well, that oftentimes the questions are very difficult to understand the language. So the more number of questions that you encounter, you will get used to the language. That is where the previous year questions, that is how you attempt them. Okay. Naveed, write a mail. I'll take it up. Okay. Write a mail. I will take it up. Okay. So that is where we'll restrict the session. I hope that this was useful to you. If any issues or any questions remain unanswered, feel free to contact us, write to us, reach out to us. We'll get back to you. So please do study. Take care of yourself. Goodbye and thank you.